Thank you, Brandon, for the introduction. I'm really happy to see you all here tonight. Thank
Hello.
you for coming out. I'm very excited to introduce to you Carolyn. For more than 20 years, Carolyn's broadcast journalism career landed her in the spotlight, working under tremendous time deadlines, often during extraordinary circumstances. She has done thousands of live reports covering fires, floods, hurricanes, and a range of human triumphs and tragedies. Her work as a journalist earned her numerous awards, including some of journalism's highest honors, such as the DuPont, Peabody, and Emmy. However, coincidence and timing placed her in the anchor chair on the morning of 9/11, the public speaking test of a lifetime. Historians will remember her as the first network news anchor to report the news of the first plane to strike the World Trade Center. From network news journalist to strategic communications director for two of the nation's largest, most troubled law enforcement agencies in Los Angeles, to co-directing the LA County government's COVID-19 pandemic response, public speaking was a critical skill for agencies overcoming crisis or the public seeking help. Yet, Carol would be the first to tell you that her first foray into public speaking was a total, almost career-ending disaster.
Thank you, Asia. How are you guys? Do you guys want to know what a total near career ending disaster sounds like? So I was maybe a few years older than you, definitely at the beginning of my career. And I had the opportunity to do my very first live shot. My very first live shot as a reporter was going to be from the Reagan-Gorbachev summit at the White House. So I was going to be standing on the White House lawn in front of a camera, going live to my hometown of Los Angeles. I was so petrified that I didn't even tell my parents, who still lived in LA, that I was going to be on TV. So I asked my colleagues, what is the worst possible thing that could happen, right? The worst possible thing. Well, the worst possible thing is, Carol, you have this earpiece and that's how you hear the anchors talking to you. That's how their control room is going to be communicating with you. And the worst thing that could happen is that you lose, it's called IFB, in interference frequency, which is what allows you to hear things in real time. But when it fails, you speak and you echo back into your ear. So imagine you're wearing an earpiece, you're standing before the second largest TV market in the nation at the summit that was going to determine the nuclear policy of two superpowers for generations to come. But they said, but that hardly ever happens. And if it happens, just take your earpiece out. So have you ever seen reporters go live and then they take their earpiece out and they sit it on their shoulder? That's what's happening to them. They're hearing their voice feedback into their ear. So of course, what happens is, now we go to Carol Lynn live on the White House lawn to tell us more about what happened today. And sure enough, the first words out of my mouth are echoing back into my ear. I am so paralyzed with fear that I do nothing except just keep talking. But I'm struggling, right? So I struggle. I get through the live shot. And then I think clearly they see that this is an unmitigated disaster and they're just going to dump out of the live shot. Thank you very much, Carol. Now on to other news. No, the anchor decides to ask me a question. And she not only asked me a question, they asked me like 2 or 3 questions, and I'm in this condition for all that period of time. So the very next day, the LA station calls my boss and they said, we like Carol, but honestly, we never want to ever have her live ever again, which was, devastating, right? Because that was the ultimate humiliation. We never want to have you live on our air again. And I did everything I thought that I could do to be prepared for that moment. And it failed me, right? Because, there's always a first time. You never know what's going to happen. And you step forward into it. And I would say, since then, fast forward through the 20-year TV career, I did do thousands of live shots from every circumstance imaginable, always kind of with that haunting first experience in the back of my mind. And little did I know that that moment of failure would prepare me for this moment in history, right? Where you're looking at something on the screen on the morning of 9/11, and you don't know what you're looking at. You don't know what it is, but you have a responsibility not only to a national audience on CNN, but when something like that happens on CNN, all the networks of CNN take you. So it's CNN domestic, headline news, CNN international, um, all, yeah, all the different CNN networks take you, and you're broadcasting around the world live. So I take away from that success can only come from failure. I really believe that. I think you've heard the phrase fail up, and that's what you do. But it's putting yourself in the position to give yourself the opportunity to take a risk. And, that was really part of it. But it took me a while. I never looked at that videotape. I know I still have it. It's like on this old school 3/4 inch videotape. I don't even think there are machines out there that play it anymore, thank goodness. I know I have it, but I've never actually watched it again, but it's seared into my memory.
That's pretty amazing that you were able to adapt so quickly, though.
Well, sometimes you find yourself in a position where you don't have a choice, and hopefully you guys as entrepreneurs find yourself in a position where not only do you not have a choice, but people are counting on you to represent them, right? All of you here are leaders in your own right, even at this early stage of your careers. And even though most of you are probably still in school, um, you are already adulting on so many levels because of the resources that you have here at Pace. So it's that responsibility that, come hell or high water, you got to get it done, right? So why not just go for it? Because, there's a point when you're in the midst of it, it just can't get any worse unless you pass out, right? And the odds of you passing out are very remote, generally speaking. So, you know, when there's no other choice, I think the path becomes pretty clear.
Yeah. Thanks for letting us know about that story. And if you don't mind, maybe we should jump into the beginning of your story. About how did you get started in the news industry? Did you always know that you wanted to be a news reporter and on TV?
No, I knew that I wanted every day to be different. How many of you guys are like that? Like you just don't want to go to the same old, have a schedule. Every day is the same, right? You got your 8 o'clock coffee, your 9 o'clock team meeting. You're talking about the same thing. It takes a year to move the ball forward, but sometimes that's what's necessary to get the job done, depending on the industry. But I wanted every day to be different. And it became a situation of be careful what you wish for, because every day was different. I mean, I walked into work and you just never knew what the story of the day was going to be. There was no way to predict it. And even when you best laid plans, breaking news is exactly what it sounds like. It's breaking your plans, breaking what your idea of the day is going to be, and then just going into it. So I wanted every day to be different, and journalism was a path forward in that. I wanted a job where I had a license to ask questions. I could call anybody. They might hang up on me, but I had a right to call them up and ask if I could speak to them. And I thought that was really cool. And I love the social aspect of it, the team aspect of it, because even though you see the reporter, there are so many essential people who are behind the scenes, who make it happen. And there's no better feeling when the piece comes together and you're working with your team.
Definitely. Can you tell us about how you got your first job and what it was like to work there?
My first job was as an intern working for free for CNN when they were a few years old, but definitely the new kid on the block, so much so that nobody knew what CNN stood for. So when you called people and you were doing research stories, you had to explain, I work for Cable News Network, Ted Turner, the Atlanta Braves, because they had heard of the founder, and they'd heard of the baseball team because it was playing pretty well at that time. And CNN because it was the upstart, so ABC, CBS, NBC were it, right? The big three. CNN was this upstart that said, yes, there's an appetite for 24-hour news. Nobody believed it. So here we were, this bureau in Los Angeles, 5 bureaus around the country, the headquarters in Atlanta. Nobody knew who we were and nobody cared. And the people they hired were all the kind of rejects from the big three, the people who had real personal issues, which we won't get into, but they had real issues that they were recovering from and trying to keep a job. And it was super dysfunctional. But it was the opportunity, because at the time, if you wanted to be a journalist, going into newspapers or going into the big three were really your choice. And the odds were very slim. But CNN was hiring, right? So you get in there, and we did all the things that over time interns, it doesn't work. Internships don't work this way. Oftentimes you guys are paid now. That's from a series of lawsuits over the decades by interns who didn't want to do the things that I did, like go get coffee, right? And answer the phone and pick up dry cleaning. And I remember on election night, I was super excited because the mayor of Los Angeles was running for governor of California, and I got to work election night headquarters. So my job was to make sure that the correspondent had enough cigarettes. So I had to do cigarette runs. And I also had to figure out how to get food, because the big three networks had catering. CNN didn't have any money. So I had to scrounge, sort of stand and look doe-eyed and innocent and hope that one of the other networks were like, oh, little girl, did you want some food? And then I would get food for the reporter. And I wore my little cotton suit and I thought I was so professional. But because CNN was the laughingstock of the industry, your position on the camera platform is an indication of your status in the industry. So we had the last camera position, which meant in order for me to get to my reporter and bring him the cigarettes and the food, I had to crawl on my hands and knees in my little cotton suit, nudging the plate of food along. But, that's what I did, because it gave me the opportunity to see the inner workings, right? And have the opportunity to ask questions and get to know the business and figure out how it worked and whether this is something I really wanted to do. And it was super exciting to be on the front lines of history.
It's hard to believe that CNN was the laughing stock of the news business.
Yeah, it really was. And, I'll give you an example of crazy in the Bureau. So our deputy bureau chief, his name was Robert Weiner, and he gave me an assignment. And there was a figure back in the day that was a very notorious figure, kind of a madam to the stars and political figures. And she had a little black book, and she was arrested. And a lot of her young ladies who were helping with the business were also arrested. And the question was, who was in her little black book and how damaging was it going to be? So he gave me, back in the day, you had phone books and tiny, tiny print. And my job was to call everybody with the first name of Vicky in the city of Los Angeles to see if I could find this person. And you can't say no, right? So you just go do it. And then I went back to him and I said, listen, I'm not getting anywhere. These people are hanging up on me, or they don't know why I'm calling. And he's sitting there with this cigar and his feet are up on the table. And he says to me, Carol, let me tell you something. The only person who has ever effing said no to me was Mother Teresa. And even then, I got her to turn around. So he said, you go back to the phone and you keep dialing. And of course, it never got me anywhere. I did this for 3 days, but those are the kind of people I was working with. But you just, it was an environment where you didn't say no for the opportunity to learn and have that exposure. It's not the way things work now. I don't know whether it's better or worse, because I actually think fewer people get internships now that most of them are paid and they're more run from a human resource department model. They're just not taking people and making them go get coffee anymore. So fewer people are getting internships, but the internships are at a higher quality.
Do you feel like you've faced different challenges working as an Asian woman in the news industry?
Thankfully, it's different now because back then it was kind of like a one Asian per newsroom unspoken rule. You don't want to have more than one Asian reporter. It's as if the suggestion was they would confuse us and it's something that you at the time accepted because diversity in the newsroom was not common, right? So to even have the opportunity to be considered was an honor. But now I look back on it and I think how archaic that is. Doesn't that sound horrible? I mean, can you imagine, this sort of unspoken rule in your workplace where you'd have one Hispanic and one African American and one Asian, and then you'd have the Caucasian male correspondent, with the Caucasian male co-anchor and so forth. But in that regard, I think it was harder because the opportunities were going to be fewer. The other thing is that, I think I looked super young for a long, long time. I mean, even into my 30s, cab drivers thought I was in high school. So, and then the dimples didn't really help either. So not only was I Asian female, but I had these dimples and it was harder to take me seriously, I think. And the second thing is that when I did speak, it was like, whoa, right? The unexpected, oh, she has an opinion or she's educated or she knows what she's talking about. And that can swing both ways, right? It can be to your advantage, but it can also be to your disadvantage because everybody comes into a conversation, no matter who you are, with an assumption. I mean, we're human animals and we read people based on our physical being, right? Whether it's our body language or how we look or how we speak, that first impression you're always trying to overcome. So as an Asian female at that time, I think there are lots of assumptions about, my demeanor or my approach, and it made it more, there was a little more payback, I think, when I wanted to be more persistent or more aggressive.
When working with CNN, did you ever believe that they would be as big as they are now?
No, because honestly, the people that I worked with at the LA Bureau and many of the people in Atlanta, have you guys seen the first Star Wars movie? Do you remember the bar scene? All those characters? That's what it was like to work at CNN. It was really the odd bunch. They were very lovable and they kind of knew what they were doing, but it was a strange group of people. And who knew what the audience was going to do with 24-hour news a day? But in the time that from the time I was interning and then I went off and worked in local and then at the network, and then came back to CNN, it became a force to be reckoned with. Less so, I would say, in the United States, more so internationally. When you reported internationally or when you were anchoring internationally, people recognized you, they remembered your stories, you really felt the significance of what you're reporting, the impact that your reporting could have on the global stage. But I also think that, and we'll kind of get into this with the public speaking piece of it, that understanding why you do what you do, knowing your why and why you're there, the notoriety of the organization that I was working with actually never really played much of a part in my career decisions. So sometimes I would go to the place that paid the least and was in third place or last place, or nobody knew who they were because that was the best opportunity. And so I'm really glad for that decision, that it wasn't about working for number one. It was about looking out for the number one opportunity.
Yeah, it definitely seems like you learned a lot more and had a lot more hands-on experience working with CNN.
Yes, and it was a non-union shop, of which I'm not in favor of necessarily because unions set the standards, set the workplace standards that are important, sets the base salary, which I think is important. But at the same time, if I was interning or working at ABC out of the gate, I would not have the opportunity to do all the things that I was able to do because they were union positions, right? So I would only be an observer versus someone who was hands-on, rolling videotape or doing interviews or things of that nature.
Most of us here would have no idea about the whole process involved in getting a story on air, from the idea to having it written and reported on. Can you explain the process of the newsroom?
Yeah. So let's say you have an idea. And, on TV, it just looks so spontaneous, right? When you see a reporter in a newsroom and they grab their camera guy and they run out onto the street and they just start reporting, right? That's not how it works. Generally, it's news, the news of the day. So when you wake up in the morning, you listen to the news and you have an idea of the day, and that day evolves. If you have your own idea, you can pitch it, but oftentimes as a general assignment news reporter, you're more subject to the circumstance of the day. What's the big, they used to call them day drivers. So, I don't know if you recall or ever notice, but sometimes like this summer seemed to be the summer of the shark sighting. Like there were a lot of shark stories and they seem to proliferate. So all of a sudden everybody's obsessed about sharks, or sometimes it's about a lot of kids seem to be go missing or get kidnapped, and that becomes the big day driving topic. So sometimes news has a force of its own, and by the time you get into the newsroom, your editors already have an idea of what they want to cover, and then you're assigned to that story, and then you go out and cover the story. Your deadlines are incredibly tight. So in local news, you're often reporting for the next show up. So if you come in at 8 in the morning meetings at 9, you're out on the road by 10, you're going live with all your elements, all your interviews, the victim, the expert, the critic, you get everybody on videotape, and then you've got to write it, edit it, and get your script approved, and then you're on the air. Network is a little bit different. Network, unless you're in a breaking news situation, it may take weeks or months to get your story on the air, unless you're out of the White House or Capitol Hill or the State Department, one of the Washington, D.C. bureau stories. But my big break actually came when I did a story about Chinese immigrants who were being smuggled on these boats to the US and working in sweatshops. And these boats were starting to appear in Los Angeles with these Chinese people from mainland China who spoke a specific dialect that my parents came from that province. And so when they found out that I knew a little bit about these people who were seeking Gold Mountain, which is what the term for the United States is for these people, they put me on that story. And that was the story that eventually got me my big break to go to ABC News, because they couldn't do the story. They didn't have the connection into the language or the culture. And so that was a good example of each of you has a unique qualifier to your big break. You may not know what it is, but it's worth thinking about. It's worth thinking about, what is my unique story? What is my secret sauce? And each of you has one. And then doing all that you can to prepare for the moment that's going to carry you forward.
Speaking of big stories, can you tell us where you were when 9/11 happened and sort of walk us through your experience reporting on that day?
Well, how old were you guys on 9/11? I mean, this was 22 years ago. 22 years ago. Were you guys even born? Ah, so what is 9/11 to you now? Does it feel like to me, it would have been maybe World War II, right? I wasn't around, but it's an historic event. So it is iconic, right? It's one of those moments. So the morning of 9/11, I was working a morning show, and the untold story is that they were auditioning this guy from CNN Sports Illustrated network who covered golf, but they wanted to see if he would be a good morning news anchor because they were trying to format the new morning show at CNN. So he was auditioning for the job. So Vince Cellini, who normally covers golf, was my co-anchor on 9/11. And we were in a commercial break, and I was about to interview Amy Tan on her new cartoon series, Sagwa, for PBS. And all of a sudden, people are running through the newsroom. Nobody ever runs through the CNN newsroom because breaking news is the bread and butter in life, that the air you breathe. So to have people running to the control room past me was a little freaky. And then I hear in my earpiece my executive producer telling me to get back to the main anchor desk, because we had different live positions around the newsroom. And at the main anchor desk, you have a series of monitors in the desk where you can preview what the next shot is that's going to go live out of the commercial break. And sure enough, there was this smoking tower, right? The North Tower of the World Trade Center. And we had no idea what happened, right? So we figure small plane into the World Trade Center. And when you go live at CNN, you can feel it. It's like this physical sensation when you go into what's called rolling coverage. Rolling coverage means the teleprompter goes blank, and you just go, right? We have no information. So in the few seconds I have left, I've got a computer next to me, and I just start looking at how many people work, Googling how many people work in the World Trade Center. So I have an idea of how many people are there. Anything I can learn about the morning commute. Meanwhile, you've got the international desk here humming away. You've got the national desk humming away. You can feel the energy in the newsroom as people are trying to gather more information. And it wasn't, so we just come out of the commercial, this just in, what you're looking at is the World Trade Center. And that moment is, so first of all, I'm known, my best moment in my career apparently is that I just showed up at work. I mean, that was my job. I was anchoring a morning show. We were going into breaking news coverage. But that clip is in so many different movies. It's in Vice, it's in Flight 93, it's in, several other films. It's featured in the Museum of News. It is an iconic clip of the beginning of what we now know as the War on Terror. So we didn't know what we were looking at. And it wasn't until the second plane hit that we knew it was terror. It was a terrorist attack. But in the interim, you have all this information coming in that is not going on the air because it's not vetted. But we're hearing 10,000 body bags are being sent to ground zero. We're hearing that there's a report of a car bomb outside of the State Department. This is before Flight 93 crashes in that field in Pennsylvania, Shanksville, Pennsylvania. This is before the third plane hits the Pentagon. We don't know what's going on. And that's how it went for a good 4 to 6 hours where nobody felt safe. Nobody felt safe. And so the second set of anchors came on shift. They were trying to get anchors set up to go live in New York. We were the first to confirm that it was a passenger jet because there were Turner Broadcasting executives in a business meeting, and they had a clear line of sight across the New York skyline to the World Trade Center, and they saw that it was a passenger jet. So that was the first confirmation that it was a large passenger jet. And so it goes. And it's not until you get out of the newsroom, and then we go into 24/7 shift coverage, but it's not until you leave that you feel the emotion of it. And later on, people told me who live in different countries that they learned what happened to their friends from our air. I had a friend in South Africa who learned that one of his best friends died that morning because of our coverage. And then you realize the impact of not only what was happening around you, but the responsibility going forward of how to process and report this information.
Thank you for sharing that with us. So we organize these events to bring together people from all different majors, which means that there might be someone here who's interested in following in your footsteps.
Is anyone interested in following in my footsteps? You want to be journalists? That's great. Oh, that's wonderful. That's awesome. Terrific.
So what's some advice that you can give them?
It's probably the same advice that I would give everybody in the room, which is, the world is changing so quickly that the job of your future, which could only be in 3 to 5 years, may actually not exist yet, or you may be the creator of it. I mean, I taught at USC's Annenberg School of Journalism, and students who graduated from that program told me that the jobs they ended up in did not exist when they were in school, and they were only a year or two out of school. So that's super exciting, but a little unnerving. Like, I have a junior at UC Berkeley, and it's unnerving for her as a media studies major to not exactly know what to focus on. But for sure to know coding, for sure to know how to do multimedia. You have to be able to tell short video stories, but in a way that's more meaningful than TikTok. And I don't want to suggest that TikTok's not meaningful, because, I watch TikTok too, but it's the cohesive whole of how you bring your story alive, whether you're going into business or you're reporting on a business. But how do I bring it alive? Because one thing that doesn't change, and I hope AI doesn't change this, is that we are animals, we're humans, we're visceral. We have thoughts and emotions, and we receive and learn information based on our already lived experience. So how do you make something viscerally meaningful and new and fresh to somebody, right? So multimedia is a great way to do that. One of the great lessons I had early on was the importance of sound. How many of you do yoga? So, when you're doing your breath, your breathing, I'm new to this, but I have learned the breathing piece of it is so important, right? And so I use that as an example. Like, having this body awareness actually helps you guys be better communicators, because we are animals and we want to make sure that we never forget that. So you want to appeal to hearts, minds, eyes, ears. You want to create a three-dimensional experience that's beyond the actual three-dimensional experience that technology is promising us, because technology is going to be available to everybody, but you as an individual are not available to everybody. So it's your intellect, how you receive the story, and how you make it real to people. You can do that through your words. You can do that through your images. How are your still images? What do your still images, your photography, bring to your story that your video does something different? So they have different experiences. A photo is like, in video, it was a 30th of a second. Like, one shot is a 30th of a second, but it can speak volumes, right? I don't know what shutter speed is now, especially with iPhones, but so your still photo freezes a moment. How is it meaningful? What do you want their eye to see? The video, who is it that you're talking to, and why do I need to hear this person, right? Your audio, don't ever discount audio. NPR does an amazing job with this, right? Just like, if you've ever listened to NPR's StoryCorps, it's just voices, but it's so riveting. I love media. I love sound and visuals and stills, because to me, it's like, it's magic, even old school. So it's what you bring to that process. I don't know if I'm answering your question, because the greatest people I worked with in the business speak like this. They talk as if they're living and breathing the story. There was a producer, an multiple Emmy award winning show producer. And I said, how do you stack a show? The lead story next and what follows. And she told me, I think of it like music. Now, the lead story is usually pretty obvious, right? But the way, when she lists the stories that she's going to do, to produce in her, that make up her half-hour show, she thinks of it like music. So some of you might think, well, that sounds so crazy. I don't know what she is talking about, but I invite you to think about it, because in this age of technology, the machine is going to win. All right. It's going to be faster and smarter, and it's going to be more prevalent in so many ways. So I think the human instinct, your mind, is the gift that is your differentiator. I think that's really important to think about.
So now I'm going to open it up to the floor. So if you guys have any questions that you want to ask, you can feel free to do so now.
So what was your best experience of the recording? Because like in the beginning, you kind of talked about like a negative experience.
Oh, I'm sorry.
But yeah. What would you say was your best?
It's funny in hindsight. There was a photo that we put up earlier. I don't know if we can put it back up, but so my best experience was actually post 9/11, and I was sent to Pakistan, and I couldn't get into Afghanistan because the Taliban it had to issue visas. in order to enter the country, and they wouldn't allow females to enter the country. So the closest I could get to Afghanistan is on the border of Pakistan, but that was a tribal territory, meaning that it was not ruled. The government had no authority in this tribal territory along the border. So to get to, and why did I want to go there? Because President Musharraf of Pakistan said, we control the border, United States, no problem. Just keep writing those checks and we'll be your partner in this war on terror. But in order to really know, did they have control of the border, you had to go to the border. So these guys are members of the Bukti tribe. They're the second largest tribe, and they live by 7th century law along the southern Afghan-Pakistan border. And I didn't know what we were going to get into. I just wanted to get out there. And as it turned out, their chief of the Bukti tribe, Anwar Khan Bukti, actually was educated in London. He graduated from the London School of Economics, and he was a total playboy, had a penchant for German lap dancers. He went to Queen Victoria's coronation, and he spoke the Queen's English. But he was the son of the head of this tribe, and then he got word that his father had been assassinated, and he knew what that meant. He would have to go back to his tribe and lead, but it meant going back to how life was lived in the 7th century. So no water, no electricity. Women had no rights. I didn't see a single woman the entire week that I was living with the tribe. I was able to live with the tribe because I was his guest. And when you are the guest of the chief, you're untouchable. So I was safe. But believe me, it was very weird for them to have me there because I was a woman and I covered my head, but basically I was free to roam. So I like this photo because we wanted to take a picture, and you can't really tell, is he taking a gun away from me or is he giving it to me, his Kalashnikov? And it's a symbol of their hospitality. But to get there, I had to be smuggled in. It was the equivalent of flying from LA to New Orleans and then driving a period of time to get to San Francisco. And then they warned me that we would have to go through several Pakistani army checkpoints. And I said, okay, what happens when we get to the checkpoint? And they said, you duck. And I said, and because why am I ducking? They said, because they might open fire. And I said, and what happens if they open fire? And he said, we fire back. But chances are that's not going to happen because they don't want that kind of trouble. So sure enough, we went through 3 different checkpoints and finally ended up at the tribal village, if you will. And I wanted to see how their legal system worked. So they had a man who was on trial in a murder for hire scheme. And in their village, the choice was you can have a regular trial, but we have a 90% conviction rate, or you can walk over a bed of hot coals and Allah determines your fate. So most people opt for the hot coals. So they take us, like, really? So they said, yeah, you want to see a trial? We've got one going, so they walked us over and they were cutting the throats of 2 goats for a blessing. There was a trench of hot coals, red hot coals, about 12 feet long. And they were waving laurel leaves or something and saying prayers. And then there was this poor guy at the end and he was sweating bullets. And then all of a sudden they yelled and then he ran, 1, 2, 3, 4. And then they swept him up at the end of the hot trench and dunked his feet in cold water. So then I said, what's next? And they said, well, if his feet blister, he's guilty. And I said, doesn't that happen like 100% of the time? And they said, no, but because I think they walk barefoot a lot. So anyway, so some people get off that way. And at dinner, the double doors opened. And Scotty, my photographer, we were going to dinner with the chief. And Scotty said, do you think I should bring my camera? And I said, yes, why not? You never know what'll happen. Well, sure enough, the double doors open. And they bring him in and his feet had blistered. So he was pronounced guilty on the spot. So I said, now what? So the chief said something, made some sentence, and he said, I am giving the family of the victim the choice in his fate. They can do whatever they want. They can shoot him dead in the street or they can make a deal. Like, what kind of deal? Well, this guy could give them land. He could give them his daughters, goats, all kinds of things, to make a deal. And I said, well, why doesn't this guy just take off into the desert? Because that's what I would do. And he said, because without your tribe, you are dead. The rival tribe is just going to kill you. So he had no choice but to make a deal with the family. So that was their justice system. And so that was my favorite story. Because it was just, when you can put yourself, you future journalists back there, when you can put yourself in a situation where it's like, really? I can't wait to tell somebody about this. It's really cool because you learn about a different culture and a different way of life, and the rule of law there has its reasons.
If anybody has any other questions or you need some time to think about it.
Thank you for your stories of how you started. And it sounds like you've been through some initial struggles when starting the industry and the power of male patriarchy or whatever. But my question is, what would you say is one habit or mindset that made you where you are today?
Failure is not an option, but that sounds so hard arse. It sounds so, especially in this age where we want to be considerate of our mental health. But I just told myself, failure is not an option. You don't have a choice but to get the story. You're going to figure this out. And my deadlines were, there were days when I worked in the LA bureau for ABC News, and ABC News went live at 3:30 in the afternoon, East Coast time, right? So there's 6:30, Peter Jennings on World News Tonight. His broadcast was live at 6:30 in New York, 3:30 in LA, which meant I only had just a few hours to pull a whole story together if I was on World News Tonight. And it was the deadlines were so unimaginably tight. There was one time a story's a minute 30 long. We had it took so long to get script approval because Peter was in a steam bath and then he was in a meeting. I swear this is what I was being told. He finally gets to script approval. He gives me script approval, and they have to split. This is before digital editing. So it was linear editing. They had to split the story into two 45-second segments in two different edit bays. And then to make it even worse, they were going to have to hot roll it. That meant into a live broadcast in New York, they hit play in LA for the first 45 seconds. Then they have to hit a switcher to blend into the second 45 seconds, and it can't look like anything happened. It had to look like one seamless piece. And because at the network level, it is so unforgiving, if you make a mistake, there was no room for failure. The producer who was working with me on the piece was so stressed out, she was literally curled in a fetal position under the edit bay during the edit, and I was just like, there's nothing I can do. It's out of my hands. But the more you do it, the more you realize you're capable of. And I know that sounds a little Pollyanna, rah, but it's very true. You just have to be able to say to yourself, I'm just going to get this done, and be committed to that. And then if things go south, which I've already explained to you, my first big experience of things going south, you learn from it. And then you try to get yourself in a situation where you don't mull, learn from it, write it down, and move forward.
All right, so we've gone a little bit over time, but if anybody has maybe one quick question, otherwise we can, oh, okay.
Right. Because I was his guest and he was educated in the West, I was fully protected. But otherwise, they don't touch you. So they don't touch, they don't make eye contact. They're never seen alone with you. So, but we weren't in a situation, I was covering a news story. So there wasn't a circumstance where I would be alone. And because I was the chief's guest, I was fine. I did get super sick. I was so sick. I thought I was going to turn myself inside out. I was that sick. And these guys So sweet. They actually had a TV that ran on a generator. They brought me a TV that played VCR cassettes, and they had a bootleg copy of Mission Impossible with Tom Cruise that somebody shot in some theater somewhere, like with a video camera in their lap. And they said they thought it would help make me feel better. So there's so many things about that story because it said a lot about human nature, right? But these if I was not the chief's guest, they would as soon kill me as look at me, So what I think from a more contemporary standpoint is it's interesting being in a truly patriarchal society, the difference between life and death and have not, and how others determine your fate. The chief had 2 granddaughters. One was 9, one was 10, one was brighter, smarter. The other, he thought not so much. The not so much granddaughter was going to be sold at age 9 to marriage, but he was saving the 10-year-old because she thought, number one, she would bring a higher price and that she was his favorite. So great. If you're a man's favorite, then you get to have a little more of your childhood, and then you get sold at a higher price, maybe to a better, person. I don't know who will treat you better. I don't know, but it was an odd feeling of the difference between life and death was such a narrow thread, and at the grace of someone else. That's someone else's decision, not mine.
All right, so we can get started with the workshop portion now.
So we want you guys to get something out of it. Enough about me. Let's talk about you. So I'm assuming you're here because you have an interest in being better public speakers, right? So I wrote up there networking and presentations because, when I talked to Asia and Addie, they said these were the circumstances that you might find yourself in that you consider to be public speaking. Am I right? Anybody else can somebody tell me a situation that they've been in and it brought to mind, yeah, I want to go to that session and learn? Anyone want to share an experience? Okay. So you consider, and that's public speaking to you, right? So what about that experience? And chime in too. What about that experience? Did you feel that you wanted to, God, I wish I knew this?
I guess just like being more confident, and especially like about, I feel like it's hard to speak about yourself sometimes.
Okay. Tell me if you agree with this. I find in Hawaii that there is it's part of a cultural thing where when you're public speaking or, when you're doing a presentation, oftentimes people are either, you want something, right? You want a job, or you're trying to raise money, or you want to get a good grade for a presentation. That's a little less transactional. But there's almost like a guilt, like, I don't really want to talk about myself. I feel uncomfortable about it, or I feel uncomfortable because I know I'm talking to this person because I want something from them. Is that something any one of you experience, or do you think it's just your lack of experience in those professional settings that concerns you?
But you can also think that maybe I don't want to share information with someone that may think that they are it's crazy.
Oh, that your qualifications are greater than the individual that you're
Then
speaking
you
to.
feel that, okay, I do not feel like.
Okay. So I want to offer this idea about the kind of conversations that you're interested in having and improving. So for those of you who feel guilt or an unease because it feels transactional, like, oh, I know I'm raising money, or I know I want a job. I want to offer this. All communication is transactional, because communication is about the sharing of ideas and moving ideas forward, right? And you can't move ideas forward unless you have a transaction. So even for those of you in a family dynamic, like parents and children, their communication is loving, but it's a transaction. Your parents want you to do something and you want to do something else. So there's a negotiation that's going on, right? And the same thing that goes on with your peers. Almost every professional conversation that you're going to have is a form of a transaction. Depersonalize it. It's not about you. It's not about them. It's about, why am I here? What is it that I need to get out of this moment? And how do I best prepare for it? So oftentimes we go into these conversations, we kind of wing it, like we'll go to a networking event and we'll say, I know when I go to an event, including this one, where there's a lot of people in the room that I don't know, and I'm not sure how it's going to go. I have this visualization of diving into a pool, because you don't realize this. I'm organically, I am an introvert. I am not a natural public speaker. I'm really uncomfortable. So is Anderson Cooper, by the way. He's super shy. But the secret sauce is, whether it's Anderson or myself, and Asia, we were talking about this too, there's a persona that develops, that you begin to develop the more you have these networking conversations. And when you go into these conversations, like I asked a million questions about you guys before I came, like Asia and Addie, well, who are they and what year are they and what are they studying? And it's about knowing your audience, right? As much as you can, because you can't make an ask of somebody unless you know something about them. And if you find yourself in conversations with people where your concern is that you have a stature that might make them feel uncomfortable, so how do you make it more comfortable? Well, that's a social situation. It's just about being disarming, but it's knowing your audience. And so, for example, afterwards, I don't know how many of you casually signed up or how many of you decided, I want to talk to Carol afterwards and get some advice or get her contact information. How do I start that conversation with her? It helps if you come to me and say, I read this thing that you said to Elle magazine that time, and I was wondering a little bit more about that, right? That's a conversation starter. And people like talking about themselves. People love it when students actually took the time to learn something about somebody. So let's say you're going to, I'll get to your job interview thing in a moment. Let's say you're going to a networking event. Know your audience. So who's in that audience? Well, what if there's 100 people in that audience? You can't talk to 100 people, but I bet there's like 2 or 3 people. I like the number 3 because 3 is very natural to our brains. It's easy to remember. I would pre-identify 3 people who are going to be there, do some light research on them, and then approach them. But approach with a goal in mind. The goal is not to ask them for a job, which apparently is the top thing you do not do at a networking event. Like, never ask somebody for a job. But you can ask them for a card, and you can ask them, is it okay if I follow up with you? Or I'd love to share more about this project at Pace I'm working on. I think it's right up your company's alley. Because you're so lucky, because you're a generation that millennials and boomers, if they're still even in the market, but millennials and Gen X want to know more about. They want to know what you think. So it's really great because technology is moving at such a pace. Your generation has a reputation for knowing things that they need to know. But if you know something about them, then it shows that you did a little homework. It's like, oh, the light's on. And it's the same with the company. So, and there are several great LinkedIn articles about conducting, preparing for a job interview. If you go on LinkedIn and search, are you on LinkedIn? Okay, if you search, there's some really great articles that help prepare. But it's all about knowing the company, but knowing it in an authentic way. So if you don't mind, I'd love for us to be able to play this video. And it's by, have any of you heard of Simon Sinek? He's a speaker and author. His whole thing is about knowing your why. Because if you know your why, then your whole presentation becomes a whole lot easier. But let me see what you think after you watch the video. It's about 4 minutes, 3.5.
All the great All the great leaders, everybody from Martin Luther King to Steve Jobs, every single one of them, those with the capacity to inspire, they all think, act, and communicate the exact same way, and it's the complete opposite to the rest of us. Where the rest of us start with what we do, these great leaders, those with the capacity to inspire and lead great change, all of them always start with why they do what they do. Great leaders are able to paint a picture of a future state that does not yet exist, a world that does not yet exist, in words so clear that we can imagine it ourselves. And if we're driven by that cause, we want to commit ourselves to help build that world. We can imagine that, we can see it, we can paint that picture in our own minds. And if that's the world we want to live in, we will raise our hands and volunteer and commit to help to build it. It doesn't have to be a social movement, but great leaders, even in business, act like social movements. They give us something to believe in, they give us a future state that does not yet exist, and offer us the opportunity to contribute our hard work, our blood, sweat, and tears to help build that world. They serve as a compass. That's what they do. Every single organization on the planet, even our own careers, always function on 3 levels: what we do, how we do it, and why we do it. What we do are the products we make, the services we offer, the things we sell. How we do it are those, whether you call it your unique selling proposition or your proprietary process or whatever you want to call it. It's the things that you think make you different or special or stand out from the crowd. But it's this concept of why we do what we do, this purpose, cause, or belief that drives every one of us, why the company exists in the first place. We don't need another one of whatever you're selling. There's plenty, but why do we need you? And it's not because of how you do it differently or what you do. There's something deeper there. It was the very reason why the company was formed. When organizations start with why, the response they will get from people who believe what they believe will be visceral. It will be deeply personal and in the emotional part of the brain. It will be hard for people to explain why they are so drawn to Southwest Airlines or Harley Davidson or Apple. They'll talk about, it's the design, it's the quality, it's the service. But in the reality, it's deeper than that. It's in the part of the brain that controls behavior, but not language. The best they can sum up is, I don't know, I just love it. But the reality is, it actually is one of the things that helps them define who they are. Apple is able to inspire loyalty amongst customers and employees, and shareholders for that matter, because the way they view themselves is different than the way most other computer companies view themselves. Most other computer companies define themselves by what they do. They make computers, and everything they try to do is in an effort to improve upon that thing, add more RAM, add more speed, make it blue, Apple defines themselves by why they exist, to challenge the status quo, power to the individual, think different. And everything they say and everything they do is to advance that idea. There was mass spontaneous mourning when Steve Jobs died. He's just a CEO of a company. He's a multi-billionaire who flies around in corporate jets. He's more like the rest of them than he is like us. And yet, we mourned his loss. Fundamentally, what a leader is supposed to do is offer a vision to the people who choose to join and offer them protection. And when people feel that their leaders have their interest in mind, they are rewarded with loyalty, love, innovation, ideas, progress. That's the thing I'm grappling with now, which is how do we create that movement so that management and leaders will create environments in which we come to work, we feel safe, we feel loved, we feel protected, we naturally cooperate as a result, we naturally trust each other as a result, we're committed to working harder, giving loyalty, sharing ideas, driving innovation. All we want to do is contribute. And so how do we create those environments in which we naturally work at our best? That would change our world.
What do you guys think? Does it make sense? So one of the things that I related to what he said with this group is this is really important. So we talked about your secret sauce, giving some thought to that. We talked a little bit about how leaders in the news business don't see things for what they are. They see things they experience things in a visceral way. So that's your audience. So why do we need you? Their interests in mind, very key, because this is so important. Who's your audience? So whether it's whoever you're interviewing with, the human, like who's interviewing me? I want to know a little bit more about them, or the company itself, or when you're doing your presentation, what kind of, if any of you have a presentation that's coming up. Oh, sorry. Do any of you have a presentation that's coming up? What's the topic? Anyone? And who are you presenting to? Okay. Okay. So they're humans. They're getting ready for their peer presentation. They're probably thinking more about their own presentations than your presentation, right? But you want to grab them, right? You want to kind of hit it out of the ballpark right at the very beginning. So knowing your audience. So even though they're other students, but what I just said, maybe it rings true, right? They're not thinking about you, they're thinking about them. They're going to compare what they're doing with what you're doing. So they're not really listening. You know, it's kind of a rote experience of listening to your peers' presentation, right? But they're really just thinking of their own presentation. So you have the opportunity to really hit it out of the ballpark with the element of surprise, right? So understanding your audience, understanding what you want to get out of your audience, and keeping their interests in mind. And understanding that we're animals who love story, right? So how you might typically start a presentation like that is, who is she? Here's some background. Here's what she did that was significant. Let's look at some details of that and so forth. But with what Simon Sinek just said, does that help you rethink your presentation in your why? Like, why did you pick her? So in a news story presentations have architecture. So think about what that architecture looks like. This is what a news story generally looks like. It's a diamond. And this, I can't tell you, hours are spent on this. It's the lead that the anchor reads. It's the opening shot. It's how do we grab them by the throat right from the very beginning? So you telling me first name, last name, date doesn't grab me. But what you love about it grabs me, right? Imagine, if you will, laying in the dark, hearing screams in the night for days on end, and you don't even have to be there, but you choose to be there. That's her why, right? And that's your why. So thinking about, well, why did I pick this? And what do I find interesting about it? And how do I begin with that point? Sometimes, like in a news story, the best opening is that soundbite, right, from the victim, the survivor, the eyewitness, that human element. In your presentations, start with the unexpected. Just like what Simon Sinek said, we almost always start with what. Sometimes we go into when, we go into how, but we often don't go into why because we think our audience already knows why. And the audience might actually think they know why, but you're going to surprise them because the why that they're thinking is not your why. You made that choice for a reason. Why? What was it about that just grabbed you? And if it didn't grab you, then you shouldn't do it because you're just going to go up there and you're going to do what everybody does and you're going to be like everybody else and you're going to get through it, but you're not going to have that amazing feeling of maybe they heard me, maybe they didn't, but you know what? I felt it. I am so passionate about this. I know exactly why I chose this topic. You know, I know exactly why I'm going to you at this networking event because you did this amazing thing a year ago and I really want to know more. And if this is not the best time, then I want to follow up with you. Is that okay? Because I read about it in Time magazine. And when I read it, I couldn't forget it. Like, why do you want to talk to that person? Maybe that person can network you to where you want to be, but so can a lot of other people over time. So pick wisely when you go into a room. And if you're nervous about it, but you know your why, I think the why gives you much more confidence. When I don't have a why, like the very last story I ever did in local news before I went to network, it was raining in Los Angeles and they wanted me to do that story. And I was so frustrated because I'm like, why is the rain a story? It was just happening. It was the what? How? Nobody cares about. It's just raining, right? I mean, it wasn't even extraordinary rain. It was just raining. And I could see my night side photographer rolling his eyes because, you can't shoot rain. You have to shoot it hitting something. So you get the windshield wipers, you get the puddle on the street, go to the freeway and you see the splashing, he knew the drill. So the why becomes, I had to find the why. Otherwise, it's just not a story worth doing. It's not even a story you'd want to watch. Okay, it's raining. Who cares? So I think why gets you through a lot, because in the news business and in entrepreneurship that asks everything of you in the beginning, it really does. Like, it's not a 9-to-5 job. It's a 24/7 passion project, right? 7 out of 10 startups fail, right? So if you have a probably greater than 70% chance of failure, why would you do that? Like, if you had a 70% chance of getting into a car accident that day, would you go drive your car? So, but you do it because you know your why, because you're solving a problem, because you've got the solution, because you got to see this through. Because my career took me away from Christmas, Thanksgiving, birthdays. I literally had friends and family who had a different set of memories from me, like for long periods of time. I would walk by a house and say, oh God, this house is really cute. Who lives there? And it's like, oh yeah, don't you remember that New Year's Eve party where we met all these? Oh, you weren't there. But I have to know the why. I made so little money in the beginning and I made so much money in the end, but that didn't matter because the money in the end did not make up for the fact that I was missing too much and I didn't have my why anymore. I wondered why. Like, why am I continuing to do this to myself? I need to do something different. Your why can work that way too. So, and you think, oh, Carol, I'm just going to do a presentation or I'm just going to a networking event. But your why really overcomes your fears. And then so you have the mental strategy of why, and then you have the technical skills of understanding that failure leads to success. You cannot have success without failure. It's not possible. It's impossible. So get out there and fail a lot, and fail in a safe environment, which is what this is. Try it, throw it against the wall, see if it sticks. And you know what? People love students. They love to help you. They love to listen to you. They love to meet you. You may not think that, but oh my gosh. And a student who actually took the time to learn a little bit about. At CNN, we had interns, and I always knew the ones that would go on to be successful, and they did. They went on to be anchors at MSNBC and correspondents, but they were the ones who walked up to me at the anchor desk or to my colleagues, and they said, can I spend a little time with you, or can I ask you some questions? I could always tell the ones that were never going to really make it. They were going to end up somewhere else. They were hanging out in their little clique over by the satellite feed operation, giggling about where they were going to go after work. And God bless them. They had the birthday parties and the New Year's Eve memories and all of that. But the people who went on to the great adventure took the risk, made themselves a little uncomfortable, made themselves ask the question. So here, you start with your story, start with your why. Then you go, like a news story starts with the point of the story, right? And then it's very predictable. They have their point, the iconic video shot, they have their sound on tape of the first interview. Usually it's the eyewitness, victim, or survivor, hopefully, or the fire captain, the expert. Then they have the pivot. Then they have the second soundbite. And then they have the foreshadowing. What's next? In your networking, and you'll notice this, by the way, in a lot of announcements, I've noticed people forget to tell you what's next. Even on TV, they don't tell you what's next. And that's like a critical thing. So make sure in the end of your conversations that you think ahead of time of how you want to end that conversation. So what's next? Have a business card, or, can't you like bump phones and share LinkedIn? Or some people have a QR code that they can share, and you scan the QR code and the contact automatically appears or downloads. But think about how your next follow-up, ask that question. Do you mind if I share more about the project? Give them a tangible, better than, can I call you next week? Give them something because you have their interests in mind. So end with a foreshadowing of what's happening next. Oh, good. Now I've got an in because I'm going to share a little bit more about the project. And honestly, even if you don't have any more to share about the project, go find something, because it's an excuse to follow up. Follow up is key. And people like follow up because a lot of, I know there are people, and the great thing is you'll be in the top 10% already, because 90% of the people don't do these things. They don't follow up. They don't have a strategy for, their opening of their presentation of their why, or their opening of their handshake. Hey, Asia, it's so great to meet you because I just read blah, blah, blah. How are you? I'm Carol.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. Good handshake. Listen, I know you're super busy here. I'm working on this thing that's right up your alley. Can I follow up with you? I'd love to send you more information.
Yeah, totally. I'll send you my email and
great. Or I'll look you up on LinkedIn, because that covers you. Because if they don't want to give you their, I don't know, people are like, then you're like, oh, I'll find you, I'll message you through LinkedIn. Because then you're taking ownership back. You're taking control back. Because if you do that, then they don't give you their contact information, but you can just be proactive and say, oh, I'll look you up on LinkedIn and I'll just message you, but I really appreciate it. You didn't take up a lot of their time. You acknowledged you flattered them, so you got their attention. So you distinguished yourself, not as a kiss up, but as, I'm just taking advantage of your student status. People love students, trust me, and their interest in mine, and then the closing. Does that make sense? Does that help? Does that give you some structure? Because here, I want to take a look at, yeah. Here it is. So the first thing is the greeting, right? So you're already gonna know who you're greeting, because you have selected them and you're gonna go to this event. It also helps when you're walking through the door. You already have a purpose. You know who you're looking for. You may meet people along the way, but you're looking for somebody, right? So you got your greeting. Then 3 I call them influencing facts. Try to memorize 3 things about that person that you learned. And then 3, the ask, sorry for my messy handwriting, or the follow-up. And your follow-up is not just, can I call you next week? Because people, do you want to be called, by somebody you just met? Probably not. But no, they know my interests and they're keeping me in mind. There might be something here, because communication is a transaction. It's not a judgment of you as an individual. It's not a judgment of them as an individual. There's something to be gained by everybody. And people love students. Can't say that enough. Okay, and starting with your why. Those are really big. Any other questions? Yeah. Oh, because we like to think about when we were your age and we were at the very beginning, and it's so exciting and scary. And because the people who have the hiring power, the people who have the influencer, the donors who have the money for your cause, or the people who have the ability to hire, the people who sit at the table, are people who are confident and successful enough in their career where there is a point where you want to give back. You really do. People start thinking, you know, I feel so fortunate. I feel blessed. The good ones, the ones you actually want to do business with or work for. And you guys are your generation is so exciting because you're different. You're the first all digital generation in history. So you have things for us to learn. You can do things for us that we can't do for ourselves. So from a transactional standpoint, you already have a base of knowledge that is readily available to you that you don't even realize how valuable that is in the business world. It's understanding their interests. A successful business solves a problem. So you want to identify what problem is it that they want to solve. Almost always when people hire in high profile positions like a football coach, let's just say they're solving a problem. You know, it was just the last problem. It may not even be the problem, but it's the problem that everyone's focused on right now. So if you can think about your audience and figure out what problem it is they're interested in solving and authentically shape your narrative to address that. Hey, I hear that you've been really interested in X, and this is what we're learning at Pace. Is this something that can I share some information on what we're doing? Did I answer your question? So ask me again. Let's see if I can do better. No, I don't feel judgment. Ask me again, though. Mm-hmm. 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 So what Simon Sinek also talks about is people don't buy your service, they share your belief, right? So in that situation, I would observe, how has that client been telling their story, and make observations about things that are effective. And how does that align with your belief system about how to tell stories? So I think people believe in connections. Hey, you know, I've noticed this about you. This is what I do. I think there's something really here. What about, and getting them excited. I think you can only excite people. People are inherently afraid of new. People learn based on what they already know. So if you understand what their background is, what they already know, and you can build upon that thread and tie it to your belief system, it has to be authentic, right? So you're not BSing people into just doing business. Then it's amazing what can happen. Yes.
Throughout your career, you often translate, taking in a lot of information and giving that meaning to the story. How do you do that?
Oh, when there's all this information coming in.
Making it make sense to people.
I think it's the good thing is our brain does a lot of that work if we kind of train it, but our brains inherently want to sort things. And we understand that we have biases. So we have to recognize that our brains are sorting based on our own biases. But oftentimes I ask myself, when a lot is coming in, what is really happening here? Which mentally allows me to step back, like, okay, I'm hearing all this noise, but what is this about? Right. So I start asking myself questions like, I try to become a third person. I try to not be so in the thick of it. I try to step outside and say, and I have different filters because they've developed over time. What's really happening here? What is that person's agenda? What does the other side have to say about that? So my brain begins to sort based on categories that allow, from a journalistic standpoint, balance. Like, well, that's what they're saying. Why are they saying that? What do they want? Okay, what does the other side say? What do they want? Making sure that I'm not afraid to ask questions of outside experts. So when I went to Pakistan, I really didn't know very much. And when I got there, I mean, I knew as much as I could know, not being there. But when I'm there, there are local scholars and whatnot, and asking the why question. Like, why does the government do it this way? Or what do the people think about that? Or why, and then you just asking those kinds of questions. Just, do I really understand this? But when a lot of information is coming, I tend to categorize in who are the parties, pros and cons, what are their agendas, what does an expert say, what is it I already know, what is it I need to know? Because the enemy oftentimes is, sometimes you need to know what you don't know. Does that make sense? So, and you need to know that you actually don't know. Like sometimes I tell myself, Carol, you actually don't know, because it's humble, because I start making all these assumptions. Well, it's this and it's this and it's this. But then I catch myself because I know it's a bad habit. And I say, well, I really don't know. So what is it that I know for a fact? So it's sorting into truth buckets. Did you have a question?
Yeah, so I feel like a problem a lot of people have with public speaking is this idea of like trying to find, when you, like for example, when you go up to talk to somebody or give a presentation, they're trying to find the perfect thing to say, which is like impossible. But if you don't prepare yourself, if you don't think about like what are the possible ways to get this perfect sentence or perfect performance out of you, you feel underprepared. So how do you deal with that?
I think you can, let's say you feel that way and it just feels overwhelming, right? And it just seems like you're trying to do so much all at once. I would break my goals down to be smaller. I would say, here's an example. A student who was asking me for advice said, I didn't get the internship that I wanted this summer and I'm really down about it. So we set a new goal, which was collect 100 business cards. All you're doing is collecting 100 business cards. People more than likely will give you their business card. Once you have that experience of success, like, okay, or 50 business cards, something you can achieve. I'm just going to start, or, you can count a response on LinkedIn, like just start messaging people on LinkedIn that you're interested in doing an informational interview with, but collect 50 contacts. And believe it or not, even though it's like, well, what do I do with that, Carol? Now I have 50 contacts, but I still haven't moved my ball forward. But you have, because you've experienced success. Now you have these contacts. You can set another goal. So each thing is a skill. Getting the contact is a skill. Knowing how to message that contact, and then how to be relevant to that contact. So layer your strategy. Don't try to do it all at once. You don't have to succeed in one transaction. What I do is I write everything down first, and then I start categorizing it. So it depends on what the big stage you mean by the big stage. There are different ways of preparing for a speech versus a PowerPoint presentation versus a meet and greet Q&A versus a training workshop. Oh yeah, you should get nervous. If you don't get nervous, you don't care. So your nervousness is a sign of caring. I think it's a big answer, but I would simply say that the hardest part is the beginning. So once you work out the beginning, your opening line, your opening story that's rooted in your why, and then you remember that whatever you say next directly correlates with what you just said. It's like a chain. So make sure that what you say next relates to what you just said, and then your story begins to build. Write down things that are important to you. If I was teaching a class, I would teach you more about the architecture of story. Because once you understand that there's a shape to stories, you can pick your architecture and apply the rules of that. But I don't want to bore you with that because we're not doing that tonight. But start with your story. Like, you know, whoever it is you're speaking to, you're there for a reason, and you passionately want these people to know something. And you can give them the dry recitation of facts. You know, the facts will come, but by then they know why they're listening to you, because you've established a shared belief. So understanding, why am I giving this speech, and what are the interests of my audience that I have to keep in mind? How do I connect with them? And then once I have them in the room, let me use my facts to support my story. Let me use phraseology that keeps them in the arena. Did you know? Because I didn't know. And when I learned it, I was amazed. But did you know that 1 in 5 children in Hawaii are going hungry tonight? Did you also know that 80% of food waste, you know, the state of Hawaii has one of the highest rates of food waste in the entire nation. And that's because we're so reliant on the restaurant industry. And here's what I believe. I believe that food is a human right. I believe that in this country, we should not go to sleep hungry. There's no reason for that. So now I'm going to tell you what we can do about it. And we're going to have this conversation, right? So I say that because I really believe that's true. I don't, this country, you know, and you have beliefs too. And even if you're starting a business, I cannot speak to you, to your interests if you're starting a business purely to make money, because I understand that, but time has taught me the pitfalls of that. It just grinds you down. But if you know why you're starting your business, you know why you're the problem that you're trying to solve, and the difference you're going to make, and the legacy you're going to have. Because when you're, you know, at the bitter end, what does everybody always say? You know, it doesn't matter how much money you have. It doesn't matter how much prestige you have. And only you will know and the significance that you had in the difference in people's lives. And that I think, if I had to rethink how I thought about life earlier on, I would want to know that, you know, in the end, I'm going to be the only one who really cares why I did what I did. So I want to feel really good about it. And I truly believe that if you can get to that place in your belief system as you prepare your presentations or network, don't do it for the sake of doing it. Understand why you're doing it. Understand what you want to get out of it. Understand that part of the fun is the strategy. It's not just getting that business card. It's like, okay, what do I do with this piece of gold? You know, how do I bump into this person again? How do I message them? What do I send them on LinkedIn to get them interested or keep me in mind? And if nothing comes from it, that's fine. The act of doing it is something. The more you do it, the more familiar it'll be, the more you'll learn, because things will happen. Every time you make an action, there's a reaction in the universe that will come back to you. So just get out there and do it and watch things happen. It's really cool. It literally, that's how it happens.
It's often difficult to change people's habits, but you mentioned the why of businesses. How can businesses connect the why with the audience to convince joining their mission?
Because I think from a business standpoint, the why has to come from the audience. You know, like the audience, there are millions of people out there are expressing, there are things that are happening in our world and on our planet that are problems that need to be solved. So the question is, where are you going to engage? And what problem is it that you're going to solve? Because if you're solving a problem, you're already connecting to your audience. It's just a matter of finding them. If you're coming up with something because you simply want to do it, but you don't know why, it's just that you want to do it and it's giving you pleasure, then it may not be a business, but it could be a passion. So I think the business has to be rooted in what the audience is telling you. And that's what any good business plan is going to demand of you. You're going to have to do a whole bunch of stuff on your audience research. So that might even be first. Who's your audience? What's the problem? What's the need? What's already out there? The competitive landscape.
Thank you everyone for your questions. And now we're gonna wrap up the workshop portion of the event. Thank you all for coming.